This interview is brought to you in association with Rabobank.
Hello and welcome to another of Rural Delivery's online interviews. I recently spoke with Tony Hamilton, Succession Planning Manager at Rabobank, about the ways farming families are dealing or not dealing with the often tricky area of succession. Since that time, Rabobank has produced a succession planning food and agribusiness report entitled Navigating the Seas of Change. Analyst Emma Higgins is with me now to talk about that. Hi Emma.
Hi Roger.
Emma, why the need for this report?
Look, succession planning is extremely critical to the farming business and to family relationships, yet it's often a really difficult journey for farming families in New Zealand. Family farming businesses are very much an important part of the fabric of our rural communities, and encompassing succession planning as part of a farm business strategy will really help to continue this legacy. So this report that I've co-authored with our succession planning team aims to really acknowledge farmers who may not have yet thought about succession planning, that, look, they're not alone. Succession planning can be quite a challenging issue, and to reassure them that while it can be overwhelming and complex topic, there are many benefits to really tackling succession head-on in an early stage.
What are the challenges to getting it right? Is it perhaps even just starting?
Absolutely. Starting is probably the number one. A lot of farmers think, well, where do I even begin? What's required is an agreed vision for where both the business and the family will be in the future, and also establishing some goals around this. But this can be really difficult to translate those goals into a formal succession plan, because you're dealing with very high value assets, and managing these can be hard enough, let alone how it will be financed over time and who will be involved as well. So further confounding the issue is, well, where do one go for advice or succession war stories? So a farmer may have heard over the fence post from his neighbour a particularly bad experience, or their own personal past succession issues and experiences may also further colour the issue.
And every farm and every family is different, right? So you might be able to listen to those stories from over the fence, but you need some way to interpret it for you and what's right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about remembering that succession planning is just one of the many elements in the overarching business strategy for preparing for change.
When should it start in the cycle of a business or a family? Is there a right or wrong time to get going on it?
Not really. The earlier the better. So I guess it's really about having those honest conversations around business goals and family priorities as soon as possible. I think family relationships are quite complex at the best of times, and then you throw in some high value assets with often very sentimental ties, and the stakes rise. So it can be quite daunting having these conversations with multiple family members, or with different goals and different priorities, and having to deal with the sensitive issue of fairness. So it can be quite complex, but really it's just important to have those honest conversations as soon as possible.
Should they be a standalone thing? Well, it sort of has an idea that maybe when everyone's back on the farm at Christmas, you sit down and talk about it. But then, Christmas might be a stressful time. And there's other things going on in people's lives. How structured and, I guess, business-like does this need to be? Or does it depend on how the family get on with one another, I suppose? Yeah,
it does depend on the family, largely. Often some people will find it a bit easier to all be together at Christmas time, or when there is an event that brings everyone together. And one of our case studies looks at that. Basically, there were about three children, two off farm and one who was overseas, actually, and one on farm as well. And they took the opportunity when the child who was offshore actually was home for a wedding, and they all got together and they talked about it then. But why that particular case study was also successful was that they used a venue away from the farm, and they also used an independent facilitator. So there was a process to follow, and that took a lot of pressure off the parents as well, and the family as a whole. And they felt they could actually listen to each family's members' expectations and really work through their thoughts and emotions without worrying too much where the conversation was going. So absolutely, it does just depend on each family and their certain circumstances.
Of course, we are talking about substantial assets. You mentioned that. Often, though, we can also be talking about some pretty substantial liabilities as well. So where the business is at in terms of its growth or development is pretty key. Does it make a difference if you're talking about a property or a business which is, largely solvent, or one that's potentially carrying a lot more debt, and whether you are in that cycle?
It definitely does factor into succession planning, because one of the biggest challenges is working out, the viability of the family farm and whether the next generation can be afforded. So it's really about looking after those currently in the business before offering new opportunities to additional family members. What's required here is building a really viable business and understanding the financial reality, having a really strong balance sheet. And the challenge with that is that, again, you've got to have those difficult conversations, which are further complicated by strong emotional ties that can often accompany, quite often, judgmental opinions that a generation's efforts are subjected to.
And it's important to remember, this business belongs to the people who created it until the succession process has gone through. And also, it needs to be a business worth handing on, so you can't have a process which distracts people from delivering that business in the first place. And it sounds odd, but I imagine that maybe sometimes people don't look through that whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, like you say, it is about also really looking after that current generation as well, the ones that have built up the business. And there is an issue there around basically the concept of control and having discussions around that. There's obviously a difference in perspectives between the current farmers and then the new generations that are looking to get a foot in the door. Can be quite overwhelming, I think, for the current generation, having to think about stepping back from the role that they've dedicated, a number of years to, while also maintaining a meaningful role in the business. But I can also see the other side of the spectrum, where it can be quite overwhelming and challenging for the current or the upcoming generation to think about cutting their teeth and getting the ball rolling on succession. And it can be quite frustrating, I guess, having to earn their stripes before they can take control.
Does it help a lot if the current owners have a strong view about what their life plan might look like without the farm or beyond the farm? Yep.
So a strong view of what life beyond the farm looks like is absolutely imperative, I think. And that's about, again, it's talking about managing expectations and thinking about growing the pie, so to speak. So looking at investment off farm, as well as how can we look at opportunities for the business as it currently is.
Now, at the moment, so if you look in New Zealand's dairy industry, the industry's taken a pretty rapid hit, and some people will have been very surprised by that. What happens when an event, some type of volatile event, drops into the middle of a succession planning process, and maybe the books don't look the way that you thought they would look, or the condition of the farm, if we're talking about a weather event or a drought or something of that nature? How can a good succession process, enable you to weather the economic and environmental storm that goes on?
It can be quite difficult, especially given the current climate for dairy at the moment. And it may be that succession planning conversations do drop off just for the interim. But the long-term view on succession, succession is a long-term view, right? So essentially you've got to look to the long term and kind of, I guess, see through the trough that we're in currently.
Why is it important to get succession planning underway?
The importance of just starting is that it's easier to open those channels of communication. So communication really is the key to successful succession. And once the planning begins, it's easier to understand each party's perspectives. And the earlier or the sooner that these expectations are out in the open, the sooner they can be managed, rather than leaving it to, life's unplanned events such as, injury or divorce or, things that happen in life.
And what about getting help? What sort of help is needed?
Look, it's important to seek independent facilitation and also advice around, your legal structures or your business structures and really understanding the whole process from A to Z.
And if people want to grab a hold of a copy of the report that you produced, where can they grab that?
All the branches will have one, so if you just pop into your local Rabobank branch, they'll be able to provide you with a copy.
That's awesome. Hey, Emma, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Roger.
This interview was brought to you in association with Rabobank.